Welcome to another zoomed-in moment of Shadow Clock. For those of you who don't know, our zoomed-in moments are a glimpse into the smaller moments of life, a deviation from our longer mainstay episodes that dive into kidnappings, discoveries of mummified remains, and heroic life-saving moments. But I feel it's these smaller moments that often give us pause, asking us to reflect on where and how we belong. And today's episode is exactly that, a smaller moment in life which presented itself to my guest, Michelle Fiordaliso, back in 2005. Michelle, who was born and raised in Queens, New York, is a writer, and it was while reading her book titled Rejected, Essays on Belonging, that I found myself completely taken with an experience she wrote about involving bees. I'm Katie Mahalik, and this is a zoomed-in moment of Shadow Clock. Hi, Michelle. Thanks for talking with me today.
Hi, so happy to be here.
So you're here to talk with me about a encounter that you had with bees. It's a peaceful encounter. It's a symbolic one. But before we get into that moment, let's start from the beginning, okay? I'm going to walk you back for a minute. It's 2005. You have a 5-year-old son. You're a single mom living in Brooklyn. Do I have all that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so what was going on in your life that made you want to move all the way across the country?
So there were a few things. One is that I had decided to be a writer, and my mentors at Uta Hagen's HB studio in the West Village said, look, single moms don't get to be playwrights, only kept women in trust fund babies, and you're talented enough to make a living. Why don't you go to Los Angeles and try to write for film or television, make some money, put your kid through college, and then maybe later in life you can write all the plays you want. But there were some other things though too, which is like, I felt like the city was pushing me out. So I lived in a brownstone and I made the poor decision to gut renovate my kitchen in a rental. I mean, look, I didn't put in a Sub-Zero refrigerator or a Wolf stove or anything like that, but I made it livable to me. And somebody was buying the brownstone and they wanted to live in my apartment because it was the nicest one in the building. My son, he was going to start kindergarten. My lease was due back on my car and I had gotten fired from my job. So I felt like if I'm going to have to find a new home, my son's going to start school, I am going to have to get a new car and a new job. What's the difference if I do it here or there?
As you're making this decision, is there anything that's keeping you there? Are you dating anyone? Is Joe's dad in the picture at all? Like, what ties are keeping you to the city, if anything?
I was dating somebody casually, but that wouldn't have necessarily been a pull to keep me there. And my son's dad and I split up when he was 10 weeks old. I did ask him how he would feel about me moving to the other side of the country. It was one of the few times in our relationship when I felt like he was real with me and owned some of his part in things and said, look, let's face it, you're raising this child on your own, so do what's best for you.
That brings me up to then the sentiment of friends and family. So you make the decision to do the move. What are people telling you? What's the support looking like? What are people saying?
I think people thought that it was a ridiculous idea. I mean, just like many times in my life, people think the things I'm doing are ridiculous ideas. You know, people, for whatever reason, I am going to chalk it up to me not having like solid enough boundaries, feel free enough to tell me what they think I should do and should not do. And so I think people thought it was pretty irresponsible to move to the other side of the country where I really didn't have very much community.
So let's go back to Brooklyn for a minute. We're going to talk about an unexpected thing you find. It's small, right? But it's relevant and quite important in this story. So you're on an errand. You are going to get packing tape.
I was doing errands for my move and I saw this bee charm and I immediately felt drawn to it. And I like things from the natural world. And so I bought it and put it on.
Until now, Michelle had never felt a particular connection to bees, nor did she know much about them. But after buying this bee charm, she began discovering fascinating things about them. So you write, if I wanted to make it, I couldn't afford to let terror take over. I had to be like a bee. Bees accomplish the impossible. What do you mean by that? Why the impossible?
Well, a bee has a body that is heavier than its wingspan should be able to support. And so aerodynamically, flight should be an impossibility for a bee. And yet they fly. And why do they fly, given that their aerodynamics are not equipped for it? And it is because they reach a velocity that transcends their aerodynamic limitations. And so that's what I meant by it.
And did you have those thoughts when you purchased the amulet, the bee, at that moment?
I don't think I did. I think it's interesting. There's a quote that I really like, which is that Nikola Tesla says that when we start to employ non-physical phenomena, we as human beings will make more progress in 10 years than we've made in all of history. And a lot of inventors will say, like, they're looking for the cure for a particular disease and something compels them to take a walk. And they happen upon this flower that draws their attention and they pick it up. And then when they're back in their lab, they discover that this flower has the exact component of something that they need for the cure that they're working on or have been working on. And to me, that's a non-physical phenomena. What had that scientist take a walk at that moment? What had that flower be on his path? What had him pick up that particular flower and research it? And so I feel a similar thing happened with me with the bee.
All right, tell me what happens next. You're wearing this amulet. The guy that you were dating comes by after taking a trip out west, and he sees you wearing the amulet, correct?
That's correct.
Tell me a little bit about that.
As I was making the decision to leave the city, I reconnected with this man. And so he immediately took to the fact that I was wearing this bee charm. So he tells me that bees migrate from one side of the country to the other. And oftentimes, if you go out into the desert at particular times of year, you could see a whole part of the sand that is covered with black. And you walk over and it's just dead bees that didn't quite make it because the conditions were just too hot when they got to the desert part of the country. And this felt like a very bad omen to me, this story.
Had Google been around at the time, Michelle might have been able to put her mind at ease with a quick search to debunk this story. In reality, there aren't bees that migrate across country in the U.S. In fact, after doing a little research, the only bee I found to have a migration pattern is the giant honeybee of South Asia. But whether or not they actually die due to harsh conditions, painting the terrain black, that's something I haven't been able to confirm. But Google or no Google search, it didn't matter, because that visual of dead bees covering a desert landscape, a landscape that sat between Michelle on the East Coast and her journey to the West, that stuck in her mind. It left Michelle feeling unnerved, as did other comments from people in her life.
Other people started to tell me stories of things that had happened to them in Los Angeles. You know, I mean, just like New York, LA is known for some of its roughness. And the idea that I was bringing my 5-year-old to live in a place where I wouldn't be supported by accessible community seemed perhaps dangerous in a way that I wasn't considering.
But bad omen or not, Michelle kept pushing forward.
It was, scary, terrifying. I think that I am not one to shy away from scary. And sometimes it's hard to know when that is courage and when that is hubris. I mean, I did do things like get a license to skydive and buy a motorcycle and bungee jump off bridges. I mean, I had the nickname Fearless Fiordaliso at some part in my life, which was really just a joke because I've been terrified through every single thing I've done in life. But I think for me that the me that I will come to meet on the other side of one of these fears is very interesting to me. In each time I'm going to discover some aspect of my humanity and humanness that I didn't yet know before.
And so Michelle swallowed her fear, as she'd done many times before, and leapt. With minimal things packed, she boarded a flight with her 5-year-old son, Joe, and flew to Los Angeles.
One of the things we have been remiss to mention, or I have been remiss to mention, is money. I think that people often think, how does one make something like a cross-country move with a child possible? I had saved up $10,000, which if you think about that rent and security and, this is not going to go that long. I don't have a job set up. I don't yet have a car, and I know I'm going to need one. So that was the part I think that people were thinking was irresponsible. Show up in a foreign city where you don't have a huge savings, and there's going to be a lot of expenses once you get there, and you don't have a job to support it in an ongoing way.
Upon landing, she did have a place to stay with a friend for a few days, as well as the use of their car to look for an apartment.
We looked at 55 apartments in 5 days. There was no GPS or Did I have a cell phone? No, I did have a cell phone, a small flip cell phone. And I had this little fold out plastic map, like the ones you get at a bookstore. And going from apartment to apartment with a kid who needs to use the toilet all the time was a challenge in and of itself.
Is Joe with you this entire time on all these trips?
Yes, he is with me. He is like in a Disney movie. He is my companion animal.
With her very own Sebastian, Flounder, or Raja, if you will, Michelle continued the search, alone in this whole new world she knew nothing about.
I sort of joke that when you go to Los Angeles, you're actually like catapulted out onto another planet because everything is so different. The light is so unique in really beautiful ways, but it's very different. The topography is completely different. And, all of these succulents look like alien creatures. And the architecture is very different. Like, I don't understand the logic of having a place with this gorgeous light where like some of the places have these like tiny little windows. And it's like, why would you do that? Just some of the places were just awful. So sometimes I would find a place that I really liked, but then wouldn't get it. And I thought that I wanted to live in Venice, but I had a visceral feeling of unsafety when I was in Venice. And the elementary school there, the kindergarten was only a half day, and that would have necessitated me having childcare for half the day. And that seemed untenable. So I had to kind of rethink. I basically just circled the 3 or 4 best schools in the city and then looked at apartments around those schools. Like I said, I can have a lot of hubris, and I had a lot of hubris at the beginning that really started to fade as the days went by.
I think it's fair to say that when we feel uncomfortable or anxious, we crave familiarity, even the smallest of reminders that we have a home or belong. When I read through your essay, it says you start missing things back at home. Could you read me that quote on page 23 of your essay? It really kind of captured, I thought, who you were and what you were leaving.
I missed the corner where I'd gotten kissed, the playground where Joe loved to slide, the block where my best friend and I sang Don Henley's Boys of Summer wearing vintage Levi jeans and white Hanes t-shirts.
So you're leaving these, what I call, these are perfect descriptions of small comforts that keep us anchored in our life, right? Keep us anchored to the spot we feel our best. And I think that's why so often people stay where they're from, because it's too much to give up all of those beautiful comforts, right? That make us who we are. And I think, those are the things that make it so hard to leave. Those are the things that make us want to stay home, right? Because that is actually home. And here you are in LA looking for this new home, and it's not happening. How does it feel?
I was starting to feel like all of these doubts that other people had expressed and wanted to prepare me for or prevent from happening by saying, don't go, I was starting to feel like they were right, I was wrong. And so I gave myself an out. I said, I'm going to write this list of what I'm looking for. And if that place doesn't show up, then maybe I'll drive back to Brooklyn.
What did that list look like?
The non-negotiables were things like in a good school district, safe, light, hardwood floors, and outdoor space. And then the negotiables were things like space for friends to stay and being able to walk to a coffee shop or a diner, a fruit tree in the garden. That's one of the great things about Los Angeles are these amazing fruit trees, avocado and citrus and pomegranate and fig.
So tell me, does it show up?
I was traveling south on the 405 towards Henry Hughes Parkway, where there was an office where I was going to sign on a place in West Hollywood. And that place did not feel great to me, but it felt like the best that I had seen so far. And I had what I now understand to be a sort of anxiety attack. I mean, life sort of got buzzy and fuzzy. I got off the highway and somehow I turned a corner and I was in Santa Monica. Like some other force took over that got me from point A to point B, and I don't know what that was. But somehow I was in front of a series of bungalows, and it was kind of a little run down with a sign behind a white picket fence. And I called the numbers, and she said, "The door's open. You can go on in," which was perfect timing because my son needed to use the toilet.
Of course.
And that sort of is like one of those non-physical phenomena that I can't really explain. Having no sort of cognition of how I got from one place to the other is always a mystery to me, but there I was.
And what does this place have on it in regard to your list?
Oh, it has everything I wanted on my list and more. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not a paradise, but I am a person, as we talked about with renovating a kitchen, that can work with a space, and I see good bones. I see great light. I see hardwood floors, an extra bedroom, a big, huge floor-to-ceiling bay window, an orange tree in the yard, another tree that I thought would be a great tree for climbing, a fence in the front and back, which means my kid can be out in the yard, the best school in the city. Yeah, so everything I wanted and more.
All right. So tell me about the night of the move-in when all of this comes full circle with one very interesting moment.
I drove up. Joe was with me, and there's a long sort of path that gets to my door because, as I said, there's a picket fence, and then there's one bungalow, and then mine is the second bungalow. And as I'm approaching, I hear this very loud buzzing noise, and so I'm like, what the heck is that? And I get to the front door, and this whole screen door that is covering the front door from top to bottom, a 7-foot door, is covered with bees, covered with buzzing bees. So like when you see a honey person pull out one of those screens and it's just a solid wall of bees, that was what was on my front door. I had never seen anything like that in my entire life, and I was not going to, hand-eye coordination or not, reach out and open that screen door. One of the things that I did not have on my list was a back door, which we had, and so we entered through the back door.
And are they still there the next morning when you all wake up?
So we wake up, and I can see from inside the house that the bees are still on the front screen, and we exit through the back door, and I take Joe to his first day of kindergarten. And I figure I'm going to deal with the bees later.
And so Michelle dropped Joe off at school and headed out to do some errands before picking him up at the end of the day.
We both come back after school, and there are a few bees on the screen, 1 or 3 or 7 or 10, but certainly not the thousands that had been there when we arrived.
And as the days go on, do they ever come back? Do the few that you had left stick around? What's that like moving forward?
Moving forward, the bees never appear again. I mean, other than a normal amount of bees in a yard that are on the flowers. And, there were always bees in the yard, but normal amount of bees.
Now, was this moment a good feeling, or did you think it was a good omen or a bad omen or no omen? What was your initial reaction with all of it emotionally?
I don't think that at that moment I contextualize what it meant. I certainly noted it as unusual, but I don't even think that I thought about, oh, bees, and I've been wearing this bee amulet for months now. I don't think I put any of that together. School was starting the next day for Joe, and I needed to get in, and it was nighttime, and I needed to get us all to sleep so that he could start school.
It wasn't until much later that Michelle began to reflect on what the moment with the bees meant in regard to Joe's and her journey west. And as writers do, she wrote about it.
When I think back to that man telling me the story of the migrating bees, and more specifically, the fallen bees in the desert, I think that image must have resonated with me as a potential outcome of us not being able to make it in one way or another, that we would set out for this migration, but fall in some way.
Can you read me that final quote that you have that tells us kind of how you feel you found home in Los Angeles?
In that time, there would be many confirmations that we'd chosen the right place. The bees were just the beginning.
This episode is a retelling of one of my favorite essays in Michelle's newly published book, titled Rejected: Essays on Belonging, featuring photographs by Lindsay Morris. The essay is titled Migration. If you liked this episode, you have to check out the rest of Michelle's book. You can grab a copy from Henry Gray Publishing, find it on Amazon, or even better, ask for it at your favorite local bookstore. That said, here's an even cooler option. If you donate to Shadow Clock, Henry Gray will send you a copy. A $10 donation gets you a paperback, and $20 gets you a hardcover. All you have to do is write the word bees in your donation memo. It's the best of both worlds. You get a great book and the chance to support the show. Just head over to our website at www.shadow-clock.com. Click the contribution button, and don't forget to write bees on your donation memo. We are an independent, out-of-pocket podcast and depend on donations like this to keep the show going. This episode of Shadow Clock is created by me. Post-production audio is by Jessica Sturgeon. Kate Cosgrove creates original illustrations for each episode of Shadow Clock, which you can see on our website at www.shadow-clock.com. Motion graphics for our social media pages are by Dariush Diaz-Azmudeh. Music is credited to Pond5 and Artlist. Content contributors, composers, and individual song titles for each episode can be found on our website at www.shadow-clock.com. If you like the show, spread the word by telling someone else about Shadow Clock, and of course, by following us on social media. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Shadow Clock Podcast, and YouTube at Shadow Clock. The more people who know about Shadow Clock, the more people we can keep sharing these true life moments with. Thank you to our bee consultant, Dr. Claire Hemingway, as well as to Dr. Sebastian Stockmeyer, both who are professors at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. To the slew of people who continue to help me in making this show in some way, shape, or form, thank you to Alejandro Velez, Kate Cosgrove, Jessica Sturgeon, Adam Gould, Dariush Diaz-Azmudeh, Bruce Sibley, Matt Sorrow, Adam Zavislak, Sienna Esposito, Mary Brum, Miles Brum, and Cindy Mihalik-Higgerson. A big thank you to our Shadow Clock interns, Shri Nalan Chakravarti, Ezra Verbelde, Brooke Gordon, Addie Krieg, and Tara Peterson. I also want to thank Charlie Peters, Mary Lear, Mary Beams, Todd Freeberg, Laura Mole, and Sue Kelcoat for their continued support, as well as to those who have given a one-time monetary contribution. Your support truly means the world, and I cannot thank you enough. Lastly, thank you to our guest, Michelle Fiordaliso. I love our conversations, and your essay continues to remind me to believe in the impossible. I'm Katie Mihalik, and this is Shadow Clock.